Korea is arguably best recognized today for being a split nation, with the South being the birthplace of K-pop singers, delectable dishes like kimchi, and technical advancements. On the other hand, North Korea is mainly cut off from the outside world and is seen as having a closed economy. How did one half of the nation adopt modernization and turn into a republic, while the other half fell under a totalitarian regime? Korea was a single, independent, and cohesive nation for centuries until outside countries started fighting for dominance of the area in the middle of the 1800s. Foreign relations, particularly with the West, were deliberately and ruthlessly denied under Yi Ha-young, also known as De Wang, who succeeded his young son, King Gujang, as de facto ruler. Japan made fruitless attempts to establish diplomatic ties with Korea. However, Japan used warships to coerce Korea into signing a treaty of friendship and commerce after De Wang gave up power in 1873, opening up a number of ports to Japanese trade. The Qing Chinese rulers were interested in the expanding Japanese influence in Korea because the nation had previously been a tributary of China. Soon after, China established troops in Korea and started meddling. In 1882, Korea was compelled to sign a treaty of friendship and commerce with the United States, as well as a trade pact that favored Chinese merchants. Thereafter, treaties were signed with the United Kingdom, Russia, Germany, and France, among other international powers. A modernization drive started as soon as Korea was exposed to outside influences. However, a consistent modernization agenda was unachievable since the governing class had divided into radicals and moderates. 3 days after the pro-Japanese radicals conducted a coup d'etat in 1884 in the hopes of radical change, Chinese troops attempted to seize power. By agreeing to remove their troops from Korea, Japan and China signed the Lee-Ito Convention, narrowly avoiding a full-scale conflict over the Korean Peninsula. Before the Sino-Japanese War broke out over Korea's dominance, the peace would only survive for around 10 years. Japan swiftly took control, and in 1895 the Treaty of Shimonoseki was signed, establishing Japan's dominance over Korea. Russia, which had long desired to increase its influence in East Asia, started to do so after witnessing Japan's dominance over Korea. Russia exerted pressure on Japan to give China back the Liaodong Peninsula with the help of Germany and France. The Japanese assassinated Korean Queen Min in 1895 as a result of Korea's increased anti-Japanese feelings sparked by this conduct. King Gujong established diplomatic ties with Russia in an attempt to preserve his own life, making concessions to Russia and other global powers both for logging and mining. The Boxer Rebellion in China sparked the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, and Russia invaded Manchuria in 1900, despite a brief re-establishment of the Korean dynasty. Despite the Korean government's declaration of neutrality, Japanese pressure compelled them to accept a deal allowing Japan to exploit as much Korean territory as they desired for military purposes. Following Japan's victory, Russia and Japan agreed to the Treaty of Portsmouth through U.S. mediation. Japan was able to establish its domination in Korea because the treaty recognized its interests there. Japan started progressively undermining the nation's sovereignty after the treaty was signed. The now Emperor Gujong sent a covert agent to the 1907 International Peace Conference in The Hague in an attempt to convince the great countries to assist in removing Japanese influence from Korea. Japan forced Emperor Gujong to abdicate in favor of his son after the call went unanswered. When Japan seized Korea in 1910, the Korean army was told to dissolve. Korean guerrilla groups had harassed the Japanese occupying forces prior to the annexation. These troops were forced into northeastern China following the country's takeover. Many Koreans fled to Siberia, Hawaii, and Manchuria as a result of the Japanese depriving them of their freedoms of assembly, speech, and the press. The Japanese shut down a large number of private Korean schools and instituted their own educational system, which excluded Korean history and language and gave priority to the Japanese agenda and language. Additionally, Korean-owned companies suffered as a result of the promotion of Japanese trade. Along with their land seizure, the Japanese declared that unregistered land would be forfeited. Farmland forests that belonged to a village or clan were taken away because no one person could legitimately claim them. The Japanese then purchased the land at a discount, jointly lamented his passing, and anti-Japanese demonstrations were held across the country on March 1st. Koreans rushed to the streets to demand independence after the Korean Declaration of Independence was read aloud in Seoul, the country's capital. Despite the nonviolent protests, Japan responded with violent suppression. When the military was called in to put an end to the protests, tens of thousands of Koreans were either killed, detained, or injured. The Japanese did not achieve the desired level of success in violently suppressing the demand for independence. Independence leaders established a corps in April. In April, independence leaders formed a Korean provisional government in Shanghai, and by September, they had elected a president, Syngman Rhee. Their efforts united Korean exiles, and they were able to establish communication with leaders inside Korea. In the face of growing eventually, Japan modified its strategy, allowing for some press freedom, substituting a constabulary for the armed forces, and becoming less blatantly repressive. Their oppressive colonial practices persisted nevertheless. As Japan transitioned to capitalism, Korea became a market for Japanese goods. As a result of Japan's industrialization, farmers in Korea were compelled to convert their arid fields into rice paddies in order to compensate for Japan's agricultural output deficit. Despite being temporarily halted during the global economic crisis of the 1930s, this program was quickly relaunched to support Japan's war operations against China. Despite an increase in rice output, the majority of Koreans were forced to rely on inexpensive imported cereals while the rice was being sold to Japan. In the meantime, Korean nationalism grew stronger, and a number of periodicals and journals gave the Korean people newfound pride in their country and a desire for independence. Japan did, however, impose military administration over Korea once more in 1931. Following the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937 and the Second World War, a few years later, they started to crack down harder on the Koreans in an effort to eradicate their sense of national identity. Koreans were compelled to worship at Japanese Shinto shrines and urged to take on Japanese names. Academic groups and studies, along with Korean publications, were prohibited. Koreans were ordered to work in mines, industries, and military stations, or they were drafted into the Japanese army to augment their military. As so-called comfort women, thousands of Korean women were compelled to perform sexual services for the military. The Korean Provisional Government relocated to Chongqing in southwest China, where it declared war on Japan in December 1941. Despite Shanghai falling to the Japanese, they established the Korean Restoration Army and fought alongside the Allies until Japan gave up its 35-year hegemony over Korea in 1945. Regretfully, Korea did not gain independence as a result of this triumph. However, the United States, Great Britain, and China promised that Korean independence would eventually be achieved in the Cairo Declaration of 1943. There was uncertainty about the specifics of this projected independence. The U.S. did not respond to the Korean interim government's request for clarification. President Franklin D. Roosevelt suggested a trusteeship over Korea during the Yalta Conference in 1945, which would have included the USSR, the Republic of China, Great Britain, and the United States. Despite the four powers agreement to this trusteeship, no official agreement was made. As tensions between the USSR and the U.S. grew, it was still unclear what Korea's future might hold. The United States urged the Soviet Union to join the war against Japan at the Potsdam Conference a few months later. The USSR declared its support for Korean independence when it declared war on Japan in August. The Americans created General Order No. 11 on August 11, 1945. 1. It demanded the surrender of Korea and Japan. Japanese forces located north of latitude 38 degrees north were supposed to turn themselves into the Soviets. However, the Americans, who arrived a few weeks after the Soviets initially arrived in the nation, would capture those south of that line. Korea was divided into two regions, with the USSR effectively controlling the north. There was controversy around the Korean Peninsula separation. Some people thought that the U.S. made this decision to prevent the USSR from occupying all of Korea. The main tenet of this theory is that the United States' strategy in Korea during World War II was to keep the nation from being dominated by any one power. Political unrest was brought on in Korea by the end of Japanese control and the consequent partition of the nation. Many political groups emerged in the South, but they all aimed for the same objective: self-governance. In order to declare the People's Republic of Korea, a National Assembly was called on September 6th after the Committee for the Preparation of Korean Independence was established on August 16th. The U.S. military, however, insisted that they were the sole government in Korea and refused to acknowledge the republic. After being temporarily banished, the temporary administration was compelled to re-establish itself as a political party rather than a government. The United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union convened in December 1945 and established a trusteeship for the governance of Korea that would last for up to 5 years. Following a wave of violence in response to the news, the Representative Democratic Council was established in February 1946 to quell the unrest. Simon Rhee, the former president of the Korean Provisional Government, presided over the council, which was made up of Koreans. An interim legislative assembly was established in October 1946, with half of its members chosen by popular vote and the other half appointed by the military. A few months later, the trusteeship in Korea was denounced by the assembly. In the meantime, a number of Korean communists living abroad helped the Soviets install a communist-run government in the north. When Kim Il-sung, the leader of the Korean Communist Party, arrived in Pyongyang in October 1945, he was greeted as a national hero. He was shown in the Red Army Major's uniform during this public appearance, and shortly after, he was chosen to serve as the first secretary of the Communist Party's North Korean Central Bureau. By establishing the South Hamgyong Province People's Executive Committee and subsequently acknowledging the committee's authority within the province, the Soviet Union was able to exert direct control over the North without the necessity for a military regime. The Bureau of Five Provinces administration was founded by Korean political figures in the North, but by February 1946, Kim Il-sung's Provisional People's Committee for North Korea had taken its place. With the help of the Soviet government, Kim Il-sung started to solidify his political hold in February 1947, and the Supreme People's Assembly was established as a legislature. The United States and the Soviet Union were no closer to reaching an agreement on the unification of Korea after years of deliberation. A resolution put up by the United States in November 1947 recommended holding general elections in Korea while the United Nations Temporary Commission watched. The Soviets blocked the UN Commission from visiting the North, despite the fact that the elections in the South proceeded as scheduled. On August 15, 1948, Syngman Rhee was elected president of the Republic of Korea in the South. The UN General Assembly proclaimed the Republic to be Korea's sole legitimate government after the military regime was overthrown. In August, elections were held in the North. The USSR acknowledged the Democratic People's Republic of Korea as the sole legitimate government in Korea, and Kim Il-sung was named premier in September. More than 70 years later, Korea remains split, with South Korea enjoying a democratic republic and the North under the control of a hereditary dictatorship. Please hit the like button and subscribe to see more videos like this one.